Um, Good morning. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting. Chairperson of this committee, the Deputy Leader and the Cabinet Member. And the recording will also be available after. Everybody in the room, please ensure mobile phones are on silent. And can I remind members to use their microphones when they're speaking, please? In the unlikely event that it's necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow the instructions given to you by the officer team. I'd like to welcome today my fellow Cabinet members, Councillor Powell and Councillor Gordon-Smith, and also our committee members today. Before I do that, Nancy, are there any apologies today, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, we have had apologies from Councillor Cutler, for whom Councillor Laming is acting as deputy, and also apologies from Councillor Kern.
Thank you very much. So therefore, I'd like to welcome Councillor Batho, Councillor Laming, Councillor Horrell, and also Mr. Light, Mr. Cho from TACT, and hopefully Mr. Light will be joining us soon. We also have officers in the room today who will be assisting us. We have Simon Hendy, our Strategic Director with responsibility for housing, Mrs. Evans, Mrs. Knight, Charlotte, and also Rhiannon, and also Mr. Palmer. Right, turning to the agenda. Do we have any disclosures of interest? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, to make fellow committee members aware, my husband is a board member at Trinity, and given that is on the agenda later in the meeting, I wanted to make everyone aware, but I don't believe that that has any prejudicial impact on my involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Item 3 is public participation. I believe that we have one person who'd like to speak, and Michelle Price from Winchester Beacon. Would you like to speak now, or would you like to come forward when we get to the agenda item, which is agenda item 8? It's entirely up to you. Okay, thank you very much. If we could now turn to the minutes of the last meeting. Has everybody had a chance to look at those? Are there any issues to raise? If not, can I take those as approved? Agreed. Thank you, everybody. Chair's announcements. I have 2 announcements today. The first one relates to a new grant that Winchester City Council has been given. I'm pleased to announce that City Council has been awarded a government grant of just over £2.7 million to help mitigate the expected pressures on homelessness and social housing resources, which will come about as we have additional people coming into our district through the government's refugee and asylum schemes. The grant has been awarded as part of the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities Local Authority Housing Fund. This fund is aimed at places which have generously welcomed a substantial number of Ukrainian refugees particularly, and we are very proud in the Winchester district of just how many people have come forward to act as hosts for those Ukrainian refugees. The grant fund looks to make sure that those areas that have been so generous are not disadvantaged by the increased pressures on the existing housing and homelessness systems. The City Council will be match funding this grant through the HRA, and it will be used to provide a total of 17 additional new homes. We will achieve this by purchasing and converting houses that are currently operating as homes of multiple occupation on our estates. So these will be converted back into individual homes. I think it's important to note for the committee and for anyone listening that these 17 homes will be in addition to the 1,000 new homes the council has committed to providing between 2020 and 2030. And they will certainly help to prevent homelessness for those seeking refuge from conflict in our district. The second announcement I have relates to an energy efficiency scheme, the Eco4 scheme. This is a flexible scheme that is set up to encourage people on low incomes to be able to introduce greater energy efficiency measures. It's part of the energy company obligation. Measures such as insulation, draft proofing, heating upgrades. We are partnering with a full poverty charity, the National Energy Foundation, to deliver this grant. And it will call on an approved network of suppliers to engage with residents and help them to identify the most appropriate energy saving measures for their homes and provide information on how to access the funding and support to do so. We know that high fuel costs are continuing to affect residents right across our district. So I'm very pleased that alongside our cost of living grant scheme and our partnerships with the Warmer Homes, we can now offer support to a wider group of residents, those particularly on low incomes, in the private sector with this Eco4 scheme. This will undoubtedly provide further help to those impacted by the ongoing high cost of living. Thank you. Right, if we now move on to our New Homes Programme update, this is a standing committee item, and I believe, Mr. Palmer, you have a presentation for us. Just before you start, Mr. Palmer, I'd like to welcome Mr. Light. Lovely to have you with us today. I'm assuming the buses were late. Indeed, sadly they often are these days. Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give you a brief update of where we are with the current schemes. As you can see, Southborough Cottages has started on site, as you can see by the collection of people in high-vis jackets. Picture was taken on a snowy day a week and a half ago. So good progress is being made on that site at the moment. Just to remind members about the scheme itself, it's the first scheme for this council, Passive House Plus scheme, but it's actually one of the first passive house schemes in the country. So we're looking forward to seeing how that is built out over the next 12 months and how it performs in efficiency terms. So in the scheme itself, there's 4 one-bedroom flats and 2 two-bedroom flats. Their projected energy saving costs of 75% over current building regulations, the highest standards of thermal efficiency we could manage in the property, less carbon generated. In fact, the plus bit of the Passive House Plus means that all the energy requirements for those homes are generated on site, so that actually there'll be no net call on energy from the grid over the lifetime of those homes. Completion is expected in December, depending on progress and weather-related issues that they may come across in the next couple of months. So certainly by this time next year, we expect the properties to be occupied. Moving on, Winnell scheme, as you can see, the houses, the 3 shared ownership houses in what we call the Avenue are nearly complete, and they'll be ready in July. The other blocks are progressing well. What you can see there is a CGI of a kitchen in the one-bedroom flats. Again, just a quick reminder, the members, there's 41 flats which will be let at market rent via the council's housing company, which was established, or the name was agreed last week as Venta Living. So these properties will be marketed to tenants probably starting in October time, or ready for occupation at the end of November, when we expect the scheme to be completed, although there's still some degree of uncertainty about completion at the moment. As I mentioned, the 3 shared ownership houses will be complete in July, and they'll be marketed very shortly to people on the shared ownership list, and we're expecting a lot of interest in those properties. The landscaping works will be the last thing that which have started, but there is a significant landscaping scheme across the whole of the Winnell Flats development, which will benefit the existing tenants as well as the new tenants as well. So moving on. Next scheme to look at is Whiteley. That is again progressing well. We're looking at taking handover this week of the next batch of 6 properties. So again, we are looking to let those immediately for new residents. And there you can see just a couple of pictures, but one is one of the kitchen units. So moving on, how do I scroll through this? Duncan, how do I get to the next slide? I forgot to there. Problem. Oh, there we go. So in terms of the schemes submitted for planning, Dyson Drive, Cornhouse, Woodman Close, with Bed Lane, you can see, had some good news about Woodman Close yesterday. We have finally had confirmation from Natural England that our geohydrology survey about where the water drains to, they have agreed with us, and now we don't have to mitigate for phosphates. We confirm with planning there's been no objections to the scheme, so hopefully consent will be granted in the next week. So therefore we'll be able to go out to tender over the next couple of months, and we'll be bringing a final business case back to Cabinet either just before the summer recess or just after, depending on the timings of when we go out to tender. So that's a piece of good news. The other schemes are still subject to various nitrate and phosphate mitigation measures, but I'll come on and say a little bit more about that now. Just in terms of a nutrient update, we are working with Natural England and the Environment Agency. We've identified a pilot sewage treatment works in the Itchen catchment area that will generate, on current estimates, about 40 kilograms of phosphate credit. That will be enough to unlock all the schemes in the current that are currently in planning, provide which is what the 0.7 figure relates to. We've then got other schemes coming forward which will calculate the phosphate credits we need, but there will be surplus credits available, which may well be of interest to other developers in the Winchester district. At the moment, the last piece of the jigsaw really is just waiting for some costs from the supplier of the packaged sewage treatment works, so that we can have basically a full cost, and then from that we can work out the final elements of the business case. We don't think we'll need planning consent for installing the new sewage treatment works, as it's engineering works. We will need agreement of the landowners, so there may be some delays in tying up the final bits and pieces, but what we're hoping to be able to say to Natural England is that we've got these works planned, we agree that they're going to generate credits, please can we use those credits now, because we are going to do the work. And that's where we're liaising closely with the Partnership for Urban South Hampshire they're going to help us make that case that those credits can be released sooner rather than later. Moving on, so there's a list of schemes under consideration at the moment, very similar to the last presentation that I gave. I want to just concentrate a little bit on Kingsbarton Extra Care Scheme. So it probably doesn't come out too well on this slide, but we've been discussing with Carla Homes a site that will help deliver 60 flats as extra care. These will be mixed tenure, so they'll be shared ownership as well as rented. We're looking to see if we can to ensure that the extra care scheme becomes part of that community hub. So the map in the top left-hand corner is where it sits in the overall development. As I say, it's probably not very clear, but it sits next to this, quite close to the school and what they call the ridge line going through the development. The diagram below that shows how the flats are potentially laid out. As I say, it's very much indicative at this stage, but we're looking that if we do put a cafe in there, and there are other community facilities that are successful at Chesil Street at the moment, like the hairdresser, that those are outward facing. So they're not only available for the residents, they're available for the wider community. So it adds to that community hub feel to the development. So that's what we're working with Carla with at the moment. We're working very closely with Hampshire County Council and Care Commissioning Body to ensure that we get the right level of care, the right design of flats as well. But looking at the lessons from Chesil, not to build rooms in that property that will never be used. So we've got to be very careful about the build cost of this scheme, and every square metre now costs, you know, potentially £4,000. So if we can save space by not putting in facilities that won't be used, that's part of the lessons we've learned from the extra care scheme at Chesil. So Carla are moving ahead with the design of that central area. We expect a planning application or in later this year, with a view to start on site potentially in early 2024. So in terms of progress today, we've not actually completed any new homes since the last meeting, so it's the same figure. But as I say, we are taking handover this week of 6 further properties down at Whiteley, and the remaining properties will be handed over in sort of June and July down there as well. Just as a matter of interest, we are seeing quite strong levels of interest for shared ownership down there. We were worried, obviously, because of the current market, how things were going to sell, and we've noticed a significant uptick in people coming to view properties, the shared ownership properties, which has been a pleasant surprise, really. Okay, finally then, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Palmer, for the update. I think it's there's lots of good progress being made. It's also good news to hear how well the mitigation works for the nutrients are going, and I'm sure members may have questions around that. If not, I'll come back to a question I have. But also that increase in demand for the shared ownership properties down in Whiteley is really, really good to hear. So, thank you for the update. Members of the committee, do we have any questions for Mr. Palmer on this? Councillor Powell, we'll go to you first.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Palmer, could you report on what sort of snag level you're getting on the Whiteley properties? It does happen with new houses. And also, are grey kitchens now the standard provision?
Yeah, I mean, all of our properties are snagged before we take handover. Oh, well, they're pre-snagged, then snagged, and then handed over. But we do have, sometimes we have issues, and usually they revolve around one subcontractor. So at the Valley, it was plumbing that was the problem. Those issues then are dealt with through the contractor in terms of defects. Then other than that, there's no real theme other than there'll always be issues with new build properties. We've noticed an improvement in build quality over the last 18 months. Is coming forward as focus has turned more to the industry and their poor quality, which they perhaps built over the previous 10 years, not just for us, but in the general market. So sometimes themes evolve, but we work hard with the contractor to make sure they're rectified as soon as possible. The second question about kitchens, we source all of our kitchens from the same provider. So within our employers' requirements, we ensure that we get all of our units, kitchen units, from Howdens, so that we know that they keep them in stock, guaranteed to keep them in stock for 10 years, and we can always get them. Shared ownership properties, it's interesting that sometimes we move away from that, we upgrade the kitchens, but then they become the responsibility of the individual to repair over time. But again, within our employers' requirements, we always stick to manufacturer we know that can provide spares, as it were, for breakages.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I actually think the kitchen looks quite smart, but I like grey best. It might be my preference. I've got Councillor Horrell, then we'll come to Councillor Gordon-Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and great news on Woodman Close, just to prove that the water goes another way than people told us. So that's a relief. People will be absolutely delighted. Two questions. We have historically had a very good relationship with Homes England, and in fact they've supported schemes and we've had high praise for how we've delivered. But I don't hear much mention of them at this point, and yet they are available, they have cash, they presumably, given our proven track record, may support us. So question, what is the dialogue with Homes England to bring more money in to support the houses? And then the second point, which I made at the Kingsbarton Forum, along with other councillors actually, is the layout of the neighbourhood centre at Kingsbarton and ensuring that in our efforts to make sure that all of the facilities are integrated, the nursery, the extra care, the community centre, that we really understand the way that there will be movement around that site, given the road and other elements, and that we don't put our residents of the extra care scheme, who may not be the most mobile necessarily, in a difficult position. So it's all about the positioning of that site at this point, and we have a great chance, I think, Chair, working with Carla to just make sure that that orientation is correct. And I just wanted to raise that here because I did raise it at the forum with the Chair about that orientation and making sure we're feeding that in. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Palmer.
Thank you. Yeah, Homes England support is important. We've had it on a number of different schemes. They are keen to spend money. In fact, they advanced our payment for Winnell. So we got sent £250,000 last week as an advance payment because, again, they just want to get money out the door. So they're clearly keen to spend money. We're in constant conversation with them. The issue for us to balance is where do we spend resources from? Because we can't combine our one-for-one receipts with Homes England grants. And we've got a conversation to be had about whether it's better to apply for Homes England grant for a scheme or better to use our one-for-one receipts. And that's the constant balancing act that we're trying to achieve. The grant rates at the moment we're hearing are quite high, and the government are very keen to support social rented housing within that. So that means the grant rates have to be much higher than if we were planning for an affordable rent. So we we'll continue to have conversations with Homes England through our partnering arrangement with Wayfarer, and then evaluate as to what's the best course of action for Winchester City Council and the Housing Revenue Account. What gives us the strongest financial position in the long run? So we are in dialogue with them, and we will be applying for grant for schemes in the future. But there are restrictions. So, for example, the extra care scheme that we just talked about, Kings Barton, because it's a Section 106 scheme, ordinarily Homes England won't give us grant for that. Whether we can persuade them otherwise, we'll have that conversation. But the general rule is no grant for Section 106. So, yeah, as I say, there are conversations ongoing about various schemes that we've got. I'm heartened by members asking questions about Kings Barton. I think that's really good that pressure goes to Carla from that direction. We're working very closely with their master planner to ensure that our extra care scheme is well integrated within that community. But it's so we'll be having conversations with Carla and their planning team. It's good that pressure comes back from members and members of the public as well, so that Carla have a tendency to follow the money. And obviously they're giving us the land for this particular site as part of the Section 106 requirement. So we are certainly making our best endeavours to ensure that that scheme is well integrated, that the uses around it are complementary, and that the people that ultimately live in that property can access facilities and are not inconvenienced in any way. So that's an ongoing discussion at the moment. And yeah, as I say, I think it will come to a head later this year when planning actually is submitted for it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I wonder, Mr. Hendy, whether you can just clarify the phrase Carla giving us the land is a requirement. If we could just clarify what we meant by that. Thank you.
I won't know the detail. I'm sure Andrew will know the detail, but I'm guessing they're giving us free service land as part of their affordable housing obligation, in lieu of other developers would actually provide finished products at a discount of the open market values. There are basically two ways in which that affordable housing obligation can be delivered. I'm guessing from what you've said in terms of Carla, they're providing serviced land to us at nil cost, and the maths have been done to demonstrate that that is equivalent to the affordable housing obligation that will deliver what Carla are required to do under the affordable housing obligation.
Yeah, it's part of the Section 106 obligation that the land suitable for 60 flats extra care scheme is given to us, sold to us for £1, and that's part of the overall affordable housing obligations for the site.
Thank you for that, and I am really pleased that you're in, obviously very regular contact with them about the extra care scheme. I was at the consultation alongside Councillor Horrell, and while I'm keen that that's integrated, I'm also keen that for the residents that go into that extra care scheme, they can enjoy that, and they're not surrounded by noise or roads or inappropriate footpaths, etc. So integrated into the local hub, but equally there are other factors to be considered. It's good that we're also learning from Chesil Lodge, what works well, what we could do better, and making sure that where we do put facilities in, if they can benefit both residents of the scheme and the wider resident group, that would be good indeed. I'm also pleased to hear that in terms of our dialogue with Homes England, I think the key thing for us is to make sure that we maximise any sorts of funding that we can to build the homes that we know we desperately need. So I know there are complications, but it's good to hear that we are actively looking at that and seeking funding as and where we can get it. Councillor Gordon-Smith, you had a question.
I note that hopefully in a short while we'll be in a position to have some surplus credits for phosphates and nitrates. Are these then sold on the open market, or can they be directed by us in some way to encourage housing where we think it's appropriate. So they're not just picked up by someone who's putting in 5-bedroom house somewhere, but somewhere where it might better match our housing needs.
That might be a question better directed towards a lawyer. However, from the council's point of view, surplus credits will be generated. It's the council's choice how it then disposes of those in a way which is fair and equitable, I would assume. We will make a guesstimate as to the credits that we require for the New Homes programme, and then anything else will then be surplus. How then the council chooses to deal with that is a matter for further consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. I know you mentioned when you were going through your presentation that once we have the go-ahead for the scheme, we'll be bringing, well, we'll actually have a business case coming forward about the costs of doing the scheme. And I'm assuming that within that, we can look at how we deal with those surplus credits, and that will come for discussion.
Yes, I think that it will have to be subject to a much wider paper. We've done this as a pilot to see what can be done and to solve the problems of our New Homes programme. That's been very much the remit of our project, but this has demonstrated that there are a further 13 sewage treatment works in the Itchen catchment area that could also be improved. But that's subject to a lot more work and a lot more investigation. My project was about solving the problems for the New Homes programme.
And again, just for the committee and anyone listening, of course, any value that comes back for those additional credits will, of course, be benefiting the HRA and hopefully will be used to build additional new homes. Councillor Power, I had one question, but I then wanted to move on. Is it pressing?
Chairman, I can take that up with Mr. Palmer afterwards. Thank you.
So if I may, we've had a discussion around the nutrient credits, which was one question I had. The other question I had was around the Winnall development. I'm delighted that the 3 houses are coming forward early July when we were expecting them October, November. So that's fantastic news, particularly for those residents who are, are much need of those two in the 3-bedroom house. I always worry. I think you said a little uncertainty around timescales for the flats. Could you perhaps give a little bit more detail?
With the we have been notified by the contractor that there has been delays over the winter, which they haven't finally quantified yet. They had issues bricklaying in the very cold weather before Christmas and the very wet weather straight after Christmas, which has had effects on their programme. So they haven't formally asked for an extension of time, but we are expecting that they will, and it may be that it takes us early into the new year for the completion of the flats. That question has been posed to them and conversations are happening. So that's where there is an element of uncertainty at the moment, just because of the inclement weather that's been around over the last couple of months.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palmer. I was going to close this item, but I just wanted to check whether either Councillor Batho, Councillor Laming, or Mr. Light or Mr. Chafe had any particular questions. You don't have to have a question, but if you do, I did want to give you a chance.
I haven't. No, I don't know about Mr. Chafe.
No. Okay, Mr. Palmer, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you again in July with more progress. Thank you. Right. We are now going to turn to agenda item 8, which is the Preventing Homelessness Grant Spending Plan 23-24. I know that Mrs. Price would like to speak from the Beacon. I don't know whether you'd like to come forward now, Michelle, as we're on the homelessness prevention grant. What we'll do is we'll just ask, just have a short introduction to the paper, and then I'll ask you to say what you'd like to say. Is that okay?
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. I did think I was going to go afterwards, but
That's what I'm suggesting. I just thought you might like to come forward now and be with us while we do the introductions.
all right. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. That's great.
As I said, this paper is going to set out the spending for 2023, and I know Mrs. Knight's going to introduce it. But I'm also pleased. I just wanted the committee to know that it does also look at our outcomes from the work we've done in the previous year and how effective the grant has been used to work with our partners to prevent homelessness. It also importantly looks at our reserves for the homelessness prevention grant, and again, I'm sure Mrs. Knight can take us through a bit more detail. It also looks specifically at how we can ensure the continuation of the good work we do in this area. By also looking at how we perhaps compensate for the cuts to the homeless prevention that Hampshire County Council have brought in, specifically to the emergency bed provision at the Beacon, and also their cut to the outreach worker, which we know is really important to our city. And just before I hand over to Mrs. Knight, again, we should be really proud of the City Council at Winchester of the work we do around homeless prevention. In the past, the government has awarded the council the Gold Standard Award for delivering frontline homelessness services, and our continued pledge to improve those services, which we have continued to do. And you'll note in the report, it does mention that as part of looking at the spending plan for this year, we did enlist an independent consultant to review our services, not only in-house, but across the work we do with our partners. And they again have complimented the council on the very good service that we have. So without stealing your thunder, Mrs. Knight, I'll let you go into a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just to apologise that the author of both this paper and the private sector renewal paper is unwell and able to attend a committee today. So I am speaking on behalf of Mrs. Thorburn, introducing the papers. And to be entirely safe, I have brought Charlotte Quinn with me, who's the Housing Options Manager, and Rhiannon Riley, who is the Senior Disabled Facilities Grant Officer, to help me with any potential questions that I may struggle with. So thank you. As Councillor Ferguson has outlined, the Council remains committed to preventing and relieving homelessness wherever possible, building on the good work that saw us become the first council in Hampshire to receive the government's prestigious Gold Standard Award in recognition of its work in preventing and tackling all forms of homelessness. And we continue to promote and deliver on the Gold Standard Best Practice Award by ensuring services are fit for purpose, so that everyone within the district at risk of homelessness receives timely housing advice and support. And despite a significant increase in the footfall presenting for housing options over the last year or so, for housing assistance and homelessness assistance, the team can still continue to prevent around 75% of all cases owed a prevention duty. And that really is quite an amazing figure. Nationally, the average is 55%. And 50% of all cases owned a relief duty. And again, the national average is 40%. And so as I endorse Councillor Ferguson's comments that the team are really working hard to support those who are most in need. The Council continues to tackle its homelessness duties by making considered and best use of its government's funded homelessness prevention grant to support homeless households to also integrate into our communities and to ensure all available support services are also available and accessible to them. There is a direct impact on well-being and health inequalities by those vulnerably housed or homeless. The provision of good quality, affordable housing options help to meet the needs of the most vulnerable and often socially excluded residents by maximising opportunities to support people out of homelessness and out of rough sleeping. And I'm proud to say that as a local authority, we do have extremely low numbers of rough sleepers. It is recognised that the Council cannot prevent or solve homelessness alone, As such, the homelessness spending plan sets out areas of spend that best supports partnership working opportunities, whilst underpinning the council's statutory housing responsibilities to ensure preventative initiatives are central to service delivery. This paper sets out the proposed spending plan for 23-24 of the homelessness prevention grant of £319,496. The detailed spending plan is set out in section 12.18 of this report, and I'm sure we'll have some debate around that area. The report also sets out the allocation of £216,466 underspent of the homelessness prevention grant from previous financial years, and this was in preparation of the Hampshire County Council's social inclusion cuts coming into effect this April. The funding was held to help bridge any potential gaps in funding to our core partners who support the council's duty to prevent homelessness and relieve homelessness. The reserve fund will also fund the strategic core grants previously issued to both Trinity Winchester and the Beacon as from this April. For the first time, the government has also allocated the housing prevention grant for a two-year period, which is very well received. And so approval is also being sought for the 24-25 spending plan within the paper, which delegated authority to the Strategic Director with responsibility for housing, in consultation with the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Community and Housing, to make minor changes to Year 2 of the serving plan should need arise or should it be required. This will also allow for the strategic core grants to Trinity Winchester and the Beacon to be issued for a two-year period, providing a bit more stability for them to prepare for their own budgets. This report and spending plan focuses on change and building on positive housing sector initiatives, practices and partnership working, so we can continue to remain a best practice, gold standard housing option service. I hope I haven't over-egged that too much. But this report, I hope you agree, is a really good news story, which I really hope you can all support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight, for a very good introduction. And Mrs. Quinn, I hope there's going to be no pressure on your team there. Michelle Price, would you like to say what you would like to say? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Parr and Councillor Gordon-Smith and the officers of the Housing Committee for their support alongside the housing team, which consists, as we've heard, of Gilly, Charlotte and Karen. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for the support towards the Winchester Beacon, especially when reviewing the homelessness grant spending plan for 23 and 24. We are proud of our partnership with the City Council and the board and directors from the Winchester Beacon. The staff team very much welcome the proposed additional funding, hopefully committed today by the Council in place of the funding cuts made to us and many other services by Hampshire County Council. We would like to thank all those who may vote in favour today. We were pleased to hear that Laura Patterson, the consultant commissioned by the Council to review local homelessness services, was in favour of our work continuing along the vital pathway that we provide in partnership with the City Council housing team and other agencies. We look forward to hearing more of the feedback from the consultants in due course. We know funding cuts for any other local agencies are not of any benefit to the local community, and I know that all those people that we all help off the street, that we support and work alongside, will be really grateful for their support being offered today. I know you're all aware we provide a large amount of support to all our residents. We currently house 22 people in 4 different venues at any one time, and all of them with one-to-one support. Along with the council housing team, we expect numbers to increase. I see an anticipated 32% is anticipated compared to previous years, and we hope to be able to work with the council to prevent any other numbers increasing. We have plans for the future to refurbish facilities at Jury Street. We are looking for another staff member to offer additional support for those who've moved on from the Winchester Beacon, the sustainment and resettlement coach to prevent a return from homelessness and work with those who've already moved on. We also hope to increase our property portfolio later in the year. I'd like to congratulate the Council on the increased provision and the figures provided by Mr. Palmer this morning of 133 completed homes, and those in planning and feasibility is a huge achievement. Hopefully, this new provision of housing will help us find additional move on for our residents. That is the problem we have at the moment. We managed a high level of about 76 of planned moves this past year, with 98% of utilisation rate. But we have only been able to accept a very limited number of incoming Winchester referrals. Interestingly enough, more from the town than from the district. We're also very grateful to have had success for residents accessing council properties with easier access to home choice. We would fully also support the following agenda item with regard to private sector housing renewal, and especially request that when making decisions, the committee remember that to be affordable for those on benefits, the rents need to be truly affordable, if at all possible, within the local housing allowance figures. Thank you, Councillor Ferguson, for all your support and for the support of the housing team and the committee. As always, I open an invitation to visit us to those that haven't. Please do let me know if you would like to visit. As always, we look forward at the Winchester Beacon to continuing in close partnership with the City Council for many years to come.
Thank you very much, Mr. Price. And you know, just hearing you speak, it's clear that it really is a close partnership working that we have with the Beacon, and that success in the city is in many ways down to that, and also the work we do with Trinity A2 and also Two Saints as well. Thank you also for your support for our endeavours for social housing and for the additional papers. Obviously, the committee today will be looking closely at the recommendations in the paper. We will have questions and debate, and obviously a decision. So you'll know by the end of the day what the committee has given approval. But thank you very much for speaking to us today. Cabinet members, cabinet colleagues, and also members of the committee, the recommendations are on page 10 of our report pack. As you're asking questions and we're going to debate, I would just ask you to bear those in mind. As Mrs. Knight said, we're being asked to approve the spending plan for this year and for next year as well, with delegated authority to the head of housing in consultation with a cabinet member if any slight changes are to be made. We're also being asked to approve the spending of 216,000 from the homelessness prevention grant. I think I've covered all four in that summary. So do we have any questions from the committee? Councillor Power, you're first in the queue.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we need to pay tribute to all those who volunteer with the Trinity and the Beacon, especially the trustees. We wouldn't be where we are today without the work that is done by those organisations. There seems to be something missing from our list of partner organisations in dealing with homelessness. Do Emmaus play a part therein, and how successful has that been?
Thank you. Yes, they do indeed. Within the report, we're referencing our core partners that we fund and work with, but we have many other partners that help us around the district. Emmaus is a very valuable resource for people that wanting to be able to move into employment and have different opportunities. We have supported them and funded some of their units in the past to increase those units, and they really are a valuable resource. We also work with our own registered providers to help with preventing homelessness. And is there any charities I've missed, do you think, that we work with closely? I think Councillor Ferguson mentioned most of them, but as you said, we absolutely can't solve homelessness alone. We need all these different options, and where the Beacon and Trinity and Emmaus do great work is they work with those softer outcomes. So they work with the longer term sustainability of keeping people out of homelessness. And so yes, but we do work with them.
Councillor Bathory.
Thank you, Chair. My question, and thank you very much for the work that's been done, and thank you. I have taken up the offer to visit Beacon and really enjoyed the sort of time there. So thank you. I recognise that quite a large part of the funding that we're having to make is as a result of cuts from Hampshire County Council. And I note that we're now looking at a 2-year budget. What is the situation if there are further shortfalls in the interim as a result of further reductions by Hampshire County Council?
Good question. We're really delighted to have the funding for 2 years, so that gives us quite a buffer. We work very closely with the Commissioner at Hampshire County Council to try and sustain the elements that they currently support us with. I suppose, to be fair to Hampshire County Council, the housing duty does firmly sit with the District Council, City Council, and so we are always pleased when they still contribute to that stage 1 facility, which obviously helps them in the long term to prevent people, presenting to them in different forms through adult services, care plans, etc. We will continue to balance the budget as best we can, keep an eye on what's happening with Hampshire County Council, but the funding has so significantly reduced now that it may just be looking at a different spending plan in year 2 or 3, and we've got that opportunity to amend the budget the spending plan if we need to.
Thank you, Councillor Bathory. Mrs. Knight, obviously some of the backfilling of the reduced funding from the county is coming from our reserves. Once those reserves are used up, will we still have that same flexibility?
That's quite a difficult one to give complete confirmation to, because the grant varies. We actually receive an extremely generous budget grant from the government, but that is truly reflected by the good work that the team does around their prevention. So it's very much based on your outcomes. So as long as we continue to work as well as we are in partnership with our agencies, then I'd like to think our government funding isn't reduced substantially. But if it is, then we would have to make some very hard choices in regards to our spending plan, because ultimately we have the statutory duty to prevent homelessness, and so we may have to look at future spending plans and how generous we can be with our grant funding.
So again, just for clarity for anyone listening, the reason we get such a substantial grant is because we are so good at preventing homelessness in the first place. That's correct? Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Horror.
Thank you, Chair. And I welcome the elements that we're able to give away and support in this paper this morning. I have 2 short questions, if I may. On the outreach worker, which we know is a hugely important element of the work that we deliver in partnership with City Council and our partner agencies. And so it's great that we have that post included in our spend. How do we intend to use that post? Because been out on the early morning runs, but there are other times of day or other ways, and actually working with our partners to maximise that. So just a little more detail about how we're going to manage the outreach spend, as I say, which I thoroughly support. And then the other question, Chair, and it's not to diminish the provision of grants to both Trinity and Beacon, which I wholeheartedly support. I only wish we could give them more confirmation going forward, but I understand the delicacies of budgets and reserves and the like. But there is inherently a disparity between the two that's come about through history, not through any immediate decision. And I thought this is the time to perhaps ask yourself and officers to understand our rationale for the difference between the two, because both make huge contributions to our ability to meet our homelessness and rough sleeping obligations. Without them, we'd be a lesser organisation. And whether that could be looked at as we go through the next year as to the balance and the amounts that we give, given the work that they both equally provide. Thank you, Chair.
I think, if I may, I'll ask officers to respond to those questions in reverse order. Just on the balance of funding, one of the things we did do this time when we're looking at this spending plan for 23, 24, and then going forward 24, 25, is we did have that independent review to look at how we are utilising the funds to the most effect that we can have for the best outcomes for residents, you know, with incredibly complex needs. And they have looked at our spend, and they are they acknowledge that the way we're proposing to spend this funding is the correct balance. But I'll just allow officers to say a little more. Mrs. Knight, I don't know.
I think it makes absolute sense for the core grants to now sit within the homelessness service, and previously it has sat in the communities team, and they have managed it and monitored it really well, and made their, as Councillor Horrell said, made historical decisions as well. We have had the review, which thinks it's pretty well placed at the moment, but what we will now be taking on as a division is monitoring the outcomes of both services, and we will be able to look at the funding ourselves with an independent view of is the funding, you know, correct, allocated in the correct areas, and so ensuring that all the work that we're funding is underpinning our statutory duties as well as our discretionary work that we do. So I hope taking it forward, we'll be able to review it.
And again, it sets it out in the report that the funding for both the Beacon and Trinity is for 2 years. So even though it will come in a yearly chunk, they know that they have that certainty for 2 years, because that's the certainty that we have as a council in terms of our grant funding from central government. I don't know, Mrs. Quinn, whether you wanted to answer the question around the outreach worker.
Yes, thank you. Okay, the current outreach provision has been funded through the social inclusion current contract, which comes to an end on the 31st of March. A2, who are taking over the new contract, have agreed to continue with that post for a period of time, which is really, we're really thankful for that, because that gives us time with our partners to all meet and discuss how we see outreach moving forward. So that decision will be made all in partnership with Trinity, the Beacon and A2, who are now the new providers of the social inclusion contract. So we need to iron out those details. We don't have a firm plan in place, but we'll be doing that in very close partnership with everybody.
Thank you very much. Do we have any more specific questions? No? Okay. Oh, Councillor Horrell, one more then, please.
And to say, would you indulge me? I was just slightly, I suppose, disappointed that although we identified it as a need, our health, mental health provision has had to be carried forward, because we haven't been able to resolve the delivery of that, and just whether to better understand how we unlock that, because I think we would all agree it's a very important part of the work that we need to support our residents on. Thank you, Chair.
Again, I think Charlotte, you'll answer, but I am aware that we have certainly tried to find that provision, and mental health workers are very, very difficult to come by, particularly the skills that we need. But Charlotte, I believe there was some good news around this.
I'm in very close contact with Southern Health over this. It's something that we all want to move forward and see the benefit of. I think there are just some issues and concerns with, you know, staffing levels, because we're looking to second a post directly. So we're just waiting for Southern Health to sort of manage some internal concerns that they have with regards to their current staffing provision.
Thank you, but it's certainly something that you're pressing
all the time. Yeah.
So if we can now turn to debate. Do I have any debate on this paper?
I think it's a wonderful plan, Chairman, and I shall be supporting it. I'm very pleased with the way we're going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Councillor Horrell?
Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly on this. I think the paper demonstrates the partnership and the relationship that we have in the city. We certainly would be a lesser council in our delivery of our statutory duties without all those who sit around us and support, particularly mentioned today, obviously, the Beacon and Trinity, and I know that they work tirelessly in cooperation with us. I think today the other positive that we've seen is that we've been able to pick up some of the shortfall in other budgets, so that others are able to continue their work, and also to ensure that we've been able to augment some of the areas of our work where we know that we get a very positive outcome, the outreach worker being a good example of that. So, Chair, I'm very happy to acknowledge all the work that goes in every day into the partnerships and the relationships at work with everyone in the city and the proposed budget. Thank you.
Councillor Leaming?
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a very well presented paper, and it demonstrates how good our housing department is. Certainly in the experience that I've had dealing with them on homeless issues, and that they've been more than supportive of the people. And I think this is a credit to them. And I think this report enables us to move forward much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leaming. Councillor Gordon-Smith?
Yes, I'm very happy to support this paper. I had some casework in Alresford with someone who was had, what should we say, complex social needs, and the housing gave him very sound advice and allowed him to sort out his problems. And there was also cash available for him to put down as a deposit on another house. He was a single man, so that obviously you know, puts him rather far down the list. But I was very pleased with the outcome, and you know, having a sort of personal connection with this. So good work, and I think the gold standard that spend money on preventing, you know, full homelessness and advising people with complex needs is money very well spent. Very useful. Thank you.
Okay, so before we turn to the recommendations, I'm obviously delighted to see this paper to come forward today. I am very pleased with the way we've looked at proactively using the reserves to maintain and enhance our homelessness provision, working with our partners to do that. I agree with Mrs. Knight that it's right that the core funding for our strategic partners, both Trinity and the Beacon, should come from those prevention grant reserves, but also I'm glad that we've been able to replace some of those social inclusion cuts particularly for the Beacon, to give them certainty going forward should we agree the recommendations, which I hear from fellow cabinet members we're very likely to do in a few moments. The other thing I'm also delighted about the outreach worker. We know that they can be very effective with some of our residents who perhaps are at risk of becoming street attached, to steer them on a slightly different course and to work with and through our partners on that. I'm also pleased that we're able to provide the additional staff resources, because while the team does exceptional work in this area, we know that the pressures are there, the caseloads are going up, the complexity is even greater. And we heard that echoed when Michelle spoke about her work at the Beacon. They're also expecting that increase, which is not something that any of us would want, but being resourced and able to deal with it is very important. I'm also pleased in the grant that we have maintained that flexible prevention and rent deposit fund. That's been uplifted this time. We know that that is an effective fund to have, because it can prevent that homelessness in the first place. So I'm pleased to see all of that in the report. If I can ask Cabinet colleagues to turn to the recommendations on page 10. We have 4 recommendations before us, and we're being asked to approve the award of the Homelessness Prevention Grant to statutory, voluntary and community organisations for 2023-24, as set out in the report paragraph 12.13. Approve the Homelessness Prevention Grant Spending Plan 23-24. Ah, that's a repeat. I've got 2 exactly the same, have I not? No. Okay, perhaps not set out in the report in paragraph 12.13 to support all detailed homelessness prevention activities. Recommendation 3, approve that £216,466 of the Homelessness Prevention Grant Reserve, which has resulted from underspends in previous financial years, as outlined in Cabinet Report CAB 3340, is allocated to support the services affected by Hampshire County Council, social inclusion cuts, and to fund the strategic core grants to Trinity Winchester and the Beacon. And the final recommendation, to approve the same grant allocation of the Homelessness Prevention Grant spend for 24-25 and delegate authority to the Strategic Director in consultation with the Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Community and Housing to make minor changes to year 2 of the spending plan. Are we agreed, Cabinet colleagues? Thank you very much. That concludes that item. And thank you very much again, Mrs. Price, for coming in and speaking to us today. I hope I'm sure you find that this is good news for the Beacon. And I'd just like to thank all of our officers who are working in this really important area. It's due to your hard work and dedication in close working with our partners that we have such a good outcome. And Mrs. Knight, can you please thank Mrs. Thornburn in her absence for the paper and all the work that she does on this. Thank you. We are now going to move seamlessly to our third item this evening, or our third substantive item, which is the private sector housing renewal strategy, which is on pages 31 to 94. Before we go into this paper, I want to draw Cabinet members and again anyone listening to the recommendations which have been slightly modified. In front of you, all committee members will have the modified recommendations, and we will go back through these at the end. But recommendation 3, in the opening sentence, it now will read that the Disabled Facilities Grants, the DFG policy for 2023-25, as set out in Appendix B, is approved, in brackets, subject to recommendation 4 below, which I'll go on to, and in particular note the new changes. In the third bullet, this is also changed. It says, approve that any land charge placed on a property for discretionary grants, that's the added element, will have no expiry date and the change will be an interest-free loan. The fourth recommendation is as follows: that the committee delegates to the Section 151 officer Mrs. Keys, who's with us today, and apologies, Mrs. Keys, for missing you off my list earlier, and Strategic Director for Responsibility for Housing, in consultation with the Cabinet Member with responsibility for finance and housing, to approve the principles of and process for the issuing of the charges under the Disabilities Facility Grant Policy as an interest-free loan. Is everyone clear on the changes? Yes? Yes. Great. Thank you. Okay, so we're now going to turn to this paper, and again, we have Mrs. Knight and we have Rhiannon as well with us to help us with this. Again, for the committee, I think it's important that we note that this paper, in effect, covers two very important aspects. We have the private sector renewal strategy document, which is a 5-year strategy, not 25 years, that would be exceptional, going from 23 to 28. And within that, it encompasses the Disability Facilities Grant Policy for 2023-25. So both are incorporated in this paper, but there are two different elements to it. Private sector renewal strategy looks at the work we do in the private sector from a strategic perspective, and obviously the Disabilities Facility Grant Policy sets out very clearly our policy around the granting of those disabled grants, which are there to ensure that as many of our residents can continue to live healthy lives in their own homes for as long as possible. Mrs. Knight, if you'd like to introduce.
Thank you, Chair. This report introduces a revised private sector housing renewal strategy, as Councillor Ferguson has indicated, for the period 2023 to 2028. The strategy now, as mentioned, incorporates the Council's enforcement and disabled facilities work and the promotion of wider energy efficient work within the private sector housing stock to reduce carbon emissions and to help reduce fuel poverty. The private sector housing renewal strategy is part of a family of strategies that underpin the Council's overarching housing strategy, and the strategy was last reviewed and updated in 2016. The broader aims of the strategy have not significantly changed, but the strategy revision allows for the inclusion of proposed new revenue streams for the provision of further targeted support to the private sector to improve private sector conditions generally. The improvement of poor condition, privately owned or rented sector accommodation is a key priority for the Council. Properties left in poor condition can have a harmful effect on the health, safety and well-being of their occupants and of the local community and environment. The recent census reported the challenge of an ageing population that are living longer, and housing tenure in later life has implications for finances, housing quality, health and accessibility and adaptability of private rented and owned homes, and that future generations of older people are now more likely to live in rented accommodation as current 30 and 40-year-olds struggle to enter the home ownership market. The aim of the private sector housing renewal strategy will support these future challenges as it aims to maintain a good standard of local private rented housing accommodation through the use of support to both landlords and tenants, with a supportive rather than aggressive approach towards enforcement powers in order to encourage landlords to remain operating within the housing options market. The DFG policy, now sitting within the PHS renewal strategy, makes best use of the government's DFG grant funding to provide adaptations for people living with disabilities, for mandatory grants up to 30,000 and for discretionary grants with a new proposed cap of 100,000 to remain living independently in their own homes. It is proposed that 4 new Pacific discretionary DFG grants are introduced to further support the aims of the discretionary grant policy. In summary, a welfare grant to fund small-scale works which are critical to a client's welfare, heating grant to restore the use of heating and hot water for vulnerable owner-occupiers living with disabilities, a relocation grant to assist disabled persons who are owner-occupiers to relocate to another property if DF adaptations in their current home are not reasonable or practical. a top-up grant to facilitate more complex and expensive adaptations for eligible owner-occupiers or registered social landlords. And so delivering the private housing sector renewal strategy and the incorporated disabled facilities grant discretionary policy will help create more diverse, healthy and cohesive communities, and will support more people living with disabilities and their families to remain living independently at home. Again, I feel this is a positive paper that I hope members can support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Knight, for that introduction. Committee members, do we have any questions? Who would like to start? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I only have two questions on this paper. Thank you, Mrs. Knight. Is one occupational therapist enough? I'm aware I can't always get one when I need one. And I'd like to explore further not making a charge on social landlord properties. I'd like to be assured that those properties will be retained for use by those with disabilities, and that our investment is secure and will be protected by those social landlords. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Yes, you are right. We are working with one OT at the moment, but it's performing. It's fine. We'll keep an eye on that. We can always use the disabled facilities grant for more staff if needed. But at the moment, what we have increased the team generally with more assistant disabled facilities officers that will be able to do to relieve the OT to do the more hands-on work that they need to do in order to make sure that we get the adaptations right, with the staff underneath doing a lot of the admin and paperwork that this does require. So we're fairly confident at the moment that resources are right, but we do have the ability to look in future years through the funding to reallocate that funding. Your second question around registered providers is we're not able to, I understand, and Mr. Hendy may think differently, but my understanding is that we can't provide land charges onto a registered provider's accommodation. They will, as a landlord, reuse that accommodation. I'm fairly confident having invested those adaptations, they will then advertise that specifically as an adapted property through the Hampshire Home Choice, and so we can keep an eye on that, ensure that it goes to somebody else in need.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Knight. Mr. Hendy, did you want to add anything?
Not really, Chair. Judy's already mentioned it would be very difficult for us to place a charge on an RP property. Those properties are already charged their funders, so it would be a bit of an empty exercise, really, even if we could do it, which I'm making sure we can.
Thank you. Can I just follow up the question about the occupational therapists? There is a slight change in the disabilities facility grant where if residents come forward, they could use their own occupational therapist. Is that correct? Because we just clarified that.
If you're referring to yes, under the grant, you can use a private occupational therapist report or a report from one from Hampshire County Council.
I'm really sorry, we can't hear you at all.
I assume you're referring to the use of a private occupational therapist report in support of an application, in which case, yes, that is confirmed under the grant. We just don't really get any, I have to say.
And would our own occupational therapist look at that report and verify it?
Yeah,
process.
With all reports, actually, she screens them all.
Great, thank you. Do we have any more questions, Councillor Buffy?
Sorry. Sorry. Thank you very much for the report. It's very insightful in terms of the support that's being given to this particular area of the community. I just would like to refer to the comment in 1117, where it refers to allocations of the money from the NHS to support people for not to enable people to be sort of able to come out of hospital, given the current pressures on the NHS. I just wondered if you've got any details of whether there are specific cases that we have where that has actually happened, that we could sort of understand and, you know, sort of how that's then been facilitated with the NHS. Thank you.
Councillor Batho, can you help officers by telling them exactly which bit of the report you're referring to?
Sorry, it's 1117 on page 39. Sorry, 11.7, sorry. My apologies, that's...
We're going there.
So in terms of hospital discharge support, it's an area we do get referrals for directly from the discharge social workers at the Royal Hampshire County Hospital, obviously mainly being the closest one. Most common ones can be something like a deep clean or a declutter in order to get somebody home. Obviously they've gone in once someone's in and they found that they can't discharge them until that's taken care of. It's obviously something that doesn't always go through a disabled facilities grant funding, but that's sort of a quite a common one that does come up from time to time. Specific provisions have been made in the new policy towards that, where it wasn't previously identified, as it's something that comes up quite often. In other ways, it's quite wide ranging, so it's quite hard to put down a specific example. Obviously, a level access shower is something that you can't necessarily have ready for someone to come out of hospital, but you can certainly have something like a ramp or a stair lift. They can go in quite quickly. Now, obviously, it's something that's usually specified as somebody's need to go home, so it prevents bed blocking.
Thank you very much, Councillor Batho, and thank you very much, Rhian, for your answer. And again, you just highlighted it, but again, perhaps you'd like to say a little bit more. We do have those very specific grants we've identified to facilitate this. Am I right? It's the heating grant, the welfare grant, because I can think of examples where someone couldn't be discharged because their heating was dysfunctional. So it could be something simple like that. But could you just sort of give a little bit more detail on Mrs. Knight?
Yeah, those more softer grants that we've brought into the policy this time will certainly help those that need to be discharged from hospital. So we would liaise with most likely the hospital social worker to make sure that someone's coming home to a warm home, and also to be able to facilitate any other support that they might require. So there are certainly, the lower level will certainly make a big difference to somebody who's sitting in a bed that really doesn't need to, who perhaps doesn't have that family support. So that will help. And obviously a lot of the work also supports the NHS around preventing people going into hospital in the first place.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Knight. Councillor Horan.
Thank you, Chair. A question about our responsibilities for checking properties in the private sector. We all know the horrendous national story of properties that are not up to standard. And although the report says very clearly that Winchester is above average in terms of being in better condition, that shouldn't make us complacent. Do we feel that we have a robust system of checking to ensure that nothing falls through the net here in our district? And Chair, the other question I wanted to ask, if I may, is around our inspections of park homes in particular. I know some of those residents feel that they're rather neglected and not always given the best service. And again, we have a particular duty in our policy there, just to reassure us all that we are following up on those visits. Thank you.
Mrs. Knight, I know that particularly Dave Cranhurst in our private sector housing team is very, very active in checking private rented homes, particularly if a resident comes forward with an issue, and he has and does get very good results when he intervenes. But if you could sort of ask the more general question about whether we have obviously a reactive service, but are we doing more? And I know the report refers to some modelling work that we do as well. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Ferguson's correct. We do have more of a dedicated resource now that checks our private sector conditions, and as we've mentioned, we are looking at enforcement a little more robustly. But the engagement is the big piece for us. We're also looking at, I understand what you're saying around, you know, are we hearing about the complaints? Do they understand where they can come for complaints? Because they also often approach the Citizens Advice Bureau. So we share stats with them as well, so that we understand those that need to be visited. It is something I think we need to promote a little bit more, where to come, particularly now with the damper mould, and that will be part of our work, making sure that that advice and assistance is there, being able to have robust leaflets that help people how to address those issues. So I think people are not shy in coming forward about mould and damp now. There's been so much publicity about it that we are seeing increasing complaints. But really, to underplan all of the work, I am really keen that we do take on a private sector stock condition survey over the next year, and we're also going to do something very similar within our council homes to ensure that we're not being complacent about we've got high decent homes and a good standard. You're absolutely right. It's important to do that work. And park homes. Did you want me to cover park homes?
Yeah.
Sorry, Karen's
Okay,
other question. Or did you want to add something? Sorry.
No, just to reaffirm that those stock survey work is coming full on both sides, both for our tenants and also for the private sector. Councillor Horry, you look like you were about to come back. Was it just to remind about the park homes?
No, Chair. It was just to reinforce Mrs. Knight's point about communication. I think some people quietly suffer inadequate conditions and don't always know. So I think the more we can promote that we're here to help and we have some powers to help is a really positive thing. Thank you.
And also, Councillor Horrell, I think it's important for councillors to also know where they can come, the information that they can pass on, or signpost people towards, and the officers that they can contact, particularly when we have new councillors who may come on with us from May onwards. I think that's important too. So we're going to the park homes, specific area.
My understanding when I was the head of service there, that we carried out park homes inspections on an annual basis through a dedicated officer that has built up rapport with the owners, etc., of the sites. And we do, and this is an area that we do enforce quite robustly if we do find that people are living in unacceptable mobile homes that are in disrepair. But my understanding is it's still on an annual basis, but I may need to confirm that and come back as part of the minutes.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. I just wondered whether you could speak to the introduction of the fees that we are going to be charging for various notices, and both the rationale behind that. Thank you. They're on page 41, I believe. And section 1114.
Yes, we are looking, and we have revised our fees charges for. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the. Trying to find the information. Yes, we have reviewed the fees charges as set out in the box, and that was through benchmarking against other Hampshire local authorities, and it indicates that the fees are charged in two formulas. I said below either an average fee based on the typical time spent expecting a dwelling, assessing the best course of action, serving notice and subsequent follow-up work, and a direct calculation of time on case-by-case basis. So we are trying to maximise the fees that we're charging in order to be able to recycle that back into the budget and to be able to carry out further works. You can see the comparisons down below of the benchmarking. And hopefully the charges themselves are self-explanatory. I don't know if Councillor Ferguson wants to add anything else.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight. It was really just to say that these fees are being introduced for the first time this year. The benchmarking work is really important. Indeed, we had hoped to take this paper at our previous Cabinet Housing Committee, but we were waiting for that benchmarking work to be complete. And I'm delighted that we are aligned with other local authorities, and we'll also be recouping the costs of the time spent. I note in the report that it's also hoped that by having those fee charges, it may nudge some of our landlords on occasion to take action before a fee is imposed, because we are still having trying to work with our landlords to get them to bring particularly homes back up to scratch, or to remove issues making antisocial behaviour problems and bring homes back into use. And I know Councillor Laming, who's with us today, saw success with one particular home in Badger Farm, and there is another home that's currently action is being taken to bring that back into use. Are there any more questions, committee members? No? Okay, is there any debate on this paper? Councillor Horrell, thank you.
Chair, I know historically the private sector and the disabled facilities were sort of together in one policy, then they were split for a period, but actually having it combined here I think is helpful to everyone. And I know as it's been through the policy committee, we looked at them independently, but actually having them here today as one unit, I think, and our duties throughout that process is really helpful. We are changing quite a number of things in the policy, particularly in the disabled grants element. So just seeking clarification and assurance really that we will make sure that that communication is really clear as to what the norm is going forward, because obviously these grants are absolutely crucial to many of our residents and families to be able to maintain a home life, and for residents to be able to have the right facilities in their home setting. So just as I say, a reassurance, but grateful because there's a lot of work in here to the officer team for the detail here and the examples that you've given in terms of the grant allocations. That table was most helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Powell.
I'm very pleased with these two papers, Chairman. I think that given the level of change, we will want to review this in a year and see how well it's working and see if we need to make any small amendments. There's an enormous amount of work here. It furthers the housing department's tradition of doing what they can with where they are and what they've got. It's really good news. I agree that we need to promote the private housing interventions that we're doing very well. Also with registered social landlords, that's proved necessary, I regret. But I am seeing a continual responsiveness, certainly on mobile homes. I've seen that our mobile home provider is being far more proactive in making sure those homes are adequate for the tenants, and I shall be supporting these two papers, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Do we have any more debate? Councillor Good.
Yes, well, we all know that the private housing sector is under a lot of pressure at the moment, with a lot of landlords stopping renting out their houses. So I welcome all support in this direction. I'm very happy to see the progress.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon-Smith. Before we go to the recommendations, I'm very pleased to see this report coming through today. I know officers have spent a considerable amount of time on both elements of that report, and I too would like to thank officers for all their work they've done on the report and the work they continue to do in this area. The private sector renewal strategy very much highlights the work that we do in the private sector. Not only looking at how we license HMOs, how we ensure they're maintained to the right standard, how we help residents when there are issues around disrepair, damp and mould, the proactive work we're doing to be part of schemes that will allow our private residents in our private rental sector to access grants for increased energy efficiency measures. That's all detailed in the report. I think the introduction of the fee structure to nudge some of our landlords or private owners to bring properties back up to scratch are also welcome. In the Disabilities Facility Grant, I'm proud that Winchester City Council is the only council within Hampshire that still offers a discretionary grant alongside the 30,000 mandatory grant. And the fact that we will be able to offer those discretionary grants up to a maximum of £100,000, I think that's something that we can be proud of in terms of ensuring that where we can, people are able to continue to live healthily and well in their own homes. I feel that the introduction of the additional grants, the welfare grant, the heating grant, the relocation grant, all of those will help to facilitate the work that we do and perhaps cover some gaps where before there may be that someone, it might have been more appropriate to move home, but because there was no relocation grant, they couldn't actually afford to move, they couldn't do that. So I feel that there are some definite improvements in these grants. So thank you, officers, for all the work we've done on this. If I can just turn to the recommendations, Cabinet colleagues, I'm going to go through these again, I'm afraid, just so that everyone is absolutely clear. We have 4 recommendations before us. The first recommendation, the private sector housing renewal strategy for 23 to 28, as set out in Appendix A of the report, be approved. 2, that we approve the proposed fee structure for the Housing Act and Mobile Home Act notices detailed in paragraph 1113 of this report, and as we've discussed today. 3, that the Disabilities Facility Grant Policy for 23-25, as set out in Appendix B, is approved, subject to recommendation 4 below, and in particular note that the new charges, the introduction of a new discretionary grants in the form of welfare, heating, relocation and top-up grant, approve that the discretionary grant level is capped at a maximum of 100,000, approve that any local land charge placed on a property for the discretionary grants will have no expiry date and that the charge will be an interest-free loan, to approve that the revised formula for the client's contribution towards the disability facility grant above the discretionary and mandatory amounts as outlined in paragraph 1231 and Appendix C of this report. And also to prove that the Better Care Fund reserve is utilised to fund an additional disabled facility case officer to accelerate the support provided via Disabilities Facilities Grant. The 4th recommendation, and the one that has been added, that the committee delegates to the Section 151 officer and strategic director with responsibility for housing, in consultation with the cabinet members with responsibility for finance and housing, to approve the principles of and process for the issuing of charges under the Disabilities Facility Policy as an interest-free loan. Are we agreed, cabinet colleagues? Agreed. That's all done. So thank you very much, everyone. Just before we close, I wanted to thank all members of the committee for your hard work on the committee this year, to thank officers who've introduced the papers and answered questions today. The Cabinet Housing Committee will meet again in July, and amongst other papers, we will be looking to see both a draft housing strategy paper and also progress and the final business plan for the housing company. So a lot to do in the new municipal year, but thank you all, and that's the end of the meeting.